Welcome. Tonight's story is shared gently, like a memory that's been waiting for you to return. Take a deep breath, and let it unfold. Part 1, The Thanksgiving Announcement. Hi. My name's Zoe Carter. I'm 26, and I didn't grow up jealous. I didn't grow up spiteful, or bitter, or calculating. But there's something about spending years being the family's emotional airbag, while someone else gets the confetti, that changes you. I never planned revenge. Not really. But when life handed me the pen, I didn't hesitate to write the final line myself. It started, like so many passive-aggressive tragedies, at Thanksgiving. I showed up in a soft blue dress, with a bottle of wine I knew no one would touch, because it wasn't from the vineyard my sister used to intern at. Everyone was already there. My parents, glowing in their curated candlelight. My sister, Lexi, perched like a magazine spread in a cream knit and that necklace I once admired but somehow never got. Her boyfriend was new. Or maybe not. It was hard to keep up. They always looked the same, tall, mildly wealthy, and slightly allergic to eye contact unless she was speaking. I wasn't even through the door before Mom air-kissed both my cheeks and whispered, "You should see Lexi's new home, just stunning. Grown-up choices." She said it like a compliment, but her eyes flicked toward my thrifted heels. Dinner was roasted, rehearsed, and insufferably long. Dad made his traditional toast with his traditional cranberry-stained tie. And then, like he'd been waiting for the exact minute, he turned to Lexi and grinned. "She closed on the house this week. Gorgeous place. 4 bedrooms. Modern fixtures. You should have seen the hardwood. Your sister's come so far." There it was. That annual bullet between my ribs. The "why can't you be more like her?" implied in every raised glass and lowered expectation. I smiled. I always smile. I've trained my jaw for it. "That's amazing, Lexi," I said, my voice syrupy and smooth. "Where exactly is it again?" She beamed. "Up near Hillside Ridge. Great neighborhood. Gated. You wouldn't believe the kitchen." "Oh," I said softly, and glanced at my wine glass. "That's funny. I didn't think the title had gone through yet." She blinked. Dad frowned. "What do you mean?" I took out my phone. Opened the PDF. Flipped it toward them across the table. "Because the title's in my name." Silence. Not just quiet, silence. The kind that wraps itself around forks midair and makes air feel heavier. Lexi stared. That's not possible." I leaned back in my chair, the wine finally tasting good. "See, I bought it 2 months ago. Through a different agent. It was supposed to be for investment. Then someone, Lexi, maybe your own realtor, leaked it to you as still available. So you put in an offer. But escrow didn't clear. You know why?" I smiled. "Because I already own it." Mom looked like she'd swallowed a candle. Dad's mouth opened, then closed. Lexi's jaw tightened, her eyes glassy. "You let me put in an offer on your house?" "I didn't know it was you at first," I said sweetly. "By the time I figured it out, well, your agent already knew whose name was on the paperwork. You remember Mike, right? Realtor from Crestview? He said it felt more professional if I didn't say anything until it was all finalized." Lexi stood up, napkin falling to the floor. "You're unbelievable." "No," I said calmly, rising too. "I'm just done being small so you can feel big." And as I left the dining room, their stunned faces frozen in amber behind me, I didn't feel cruel. I felt even. For the first time in years, Dad tried to laugh, a soft wheeze of disbelief as if I'd just cracked a bad joke over mashed potatoes, but when I didn't flinch, his expression stiffened, like someone realizing the punchline was real and they were the butt of it. Lexi was still standing, but her posture had shifted, rigid, like a porcelain doll braced for impact. She reached across the table and snatched the phone from Dad's hands, eyes scanning the screen like it might blink and say, "Just kidding." But the deed was there, plain as the roast turkey in front of us, my name in bold black letters and a closing date 2 months prior. "You bought a house," she said, voice thin and sharp, "in Hillside Ridge." "Yes," I replied, still standing, still calm. "You didn't think I'd ever do something that smart, did you?" I didn't phrase it like a question, because I knew the answer, and she didn't deny it, just handed the phone back like it burned. Mom finally broke the silence with that classic tight-lipped tone she reserved for PDA meetings and social humiliation. "Zoe, why wouldn't you tell us you were buying a property?" I turned to her, and for the first time in years, I didn't shrink. Because every time I try to talk about anything bigger than a parking ticket, you look at Lexi to see if it's worth listening. Mom opened her mouth but I didn't stop, and every time Lexi does anything, a new purse, a new boyfriend, a new apartment, you act like she cured cancer. Lexi let out a gasp but I kept going, so I stopped trying to impress you, and I started investing in myself, quietly, without the applause. Turns out that's how things get done. Lexi's boyfriend, I think his name was Grant. shifted in his chair uncomfortably, probably regretting ever accepting the invite. I glanced at him and added, "Congrats, by the way, if she let you see the inside of that house you'll now never live in." Lexi's chair scraped loudly as she sat back down, arms crossed like she was folding herself in for protection. "You're spiteful," she said. "You planned this." "No," I said, my voice soft, "I just didn't stop it when I realized who you were." Dad cleared his throat like he wanted to regain control of the evening. "It's Thanksgiving," he said stiffly. "Maybe we can all just eat and talk about this another time." "Sure," I said, sliding my chair back in. "We'll pretend none of this happened, just like every other time something uncomfortable shows up at this table." And then I reached for my glass, toasted the chandelier above us, and drank slowly, because I was done swallowing things silently. Lexi didn't say much after that. And honestly, that scared me more than if she'd screamed, because when Lexi went quiet, it usually meant she was recalculating, finding a new way to spin the narrative so she could still be the heroine in the family's eyes. Mom passed the gravy with a tight smile, like if she could just keep the motions going, no one would notice the tension thick enough to carve with the steak knife. Dad tried to steer the conversation toward the dessert table. "Zoe, didn't you bring that pumpkin tart again?" And I nodded, stood, and walked it to the counter in silence, but the second I turned my back, I heard Lexi's voice, cool and clipped. "I'm sure it's store-bought." Like always, my hand paused mid-reach for the knife, not because the comment hurt, not anymore, but because I realized something right then. She wasn't just upset I'd bought the house. She was humiliated, and Lexi didn't do well with being outshone. I cut the tart calmly, plated it with precision, then carried the first piece to her and set it down with a smile. "Store-bought, sure," I said sweetly, "from Elliot and Grace, since I know how much you liked it last year." Her eyes widened, just slightly, because that bakery had a waitlist and a price tag to match. She didn't say thank you, but she also didn't push it away, and that's when I knew I'd hit something real, something under the surface of all that polish and praise. Dinner limped along, fake chuckles and forced bites, until Lexi's phone buzzed on the table and she grabbed it like a lifeline, reading quickly, then narrowing her eyes at me. "Why did Mike text me that the sales off permanently?" she snapped. I raised an eyebrow. "Maybe because you tried to lowball the seller on a house you couldn't even legally buy, but it was still under negotiation," she hissed. "He said there was a window." "There was," I said. "Until you used my name to get a better rate on inspection. That's when I pulled the plug." Dad finally lost it then, voice rising. "You what? You sabotaged her deal?" "No," I said flatly. "I protected my property from being used like a stepping stool." And there it was again, that look from Mom, like I'd just said something indecent in church, but I didn't care anymore. I didn't owe them politeness. When they never offered me fairness, I didn't start this, I added, but I sure as hell made sure I'd finish it. Lexi stood again, fists clenched now, her voice sharp like the edge of the dessert knife still sitting by the tart. "You humiliated me in front of everyone," she hissed. "You've been waiting to do this for years." I didn't deny it. Because I hadn't been waiting, I just finally stopped backing down. "No," I said, "I just stopped letting you take what was mine and call it a favor." Mom's hand flew to her chest like I'd just slapped her. "We don't talk to family like that," she gasped. "Funny," I replied, "because you've let her talk to me like that since we were kids." Dad stood too, probably hoping height would restore authority. But it didn't, not anymore. "You've made your point, Zoe," he said sternly. "Now sit down and stop making a scene." I looked him dead in the eye and said what I should have said 10 years ago. "The scene was made the day you decided her success meant more than my peace." And then I picked up my bag, slid my phone inside, and turned toward the door. "You're really leaving?" Lexi asked, and for once, it didn't sound smug, it sounded hollow, like she knew this time I wasn't just storming off to cool down. I paused only once, hand on the doorknob, and glanced back over my shoulder. "Happy Thanksgiving," I said. "Oh, and be sure to update your Zillow alerts." Then I left, heels clicking calmly down the walkway, the chill of the night biting at my skin, but it didn't matter. I'd finally stopped waiting to be chosen, I'd chosen myself. Instead, Zoe just walked out, but the door she closed behind her? It won't stay shut for long. Because in part 2, her sister isn't done fighting, and this time, she's playing dirty. Stay tuned. Part 2, The House Always Wins. The text came 3 days later, short and sharp like the way Lexi used to flick my arm when no one was looking. "Hope it was worth it." No punctuation, no signature, just that one bitter string of words that told me she wasn't done, and sure enough, by the end of the week, I'd heard from the HOA, then a landscaper, then a zoning board email that I wasn't supposed to be CC'd on but absolutely was. Lexi was trying to make owning that house hell. She was petty in the way only someone raised to believe they never lose could be, but what she didn't know was that I'd been preparing for this for years. Not revenge exactly, just contingency. I'd bought the house under my LLC, So Carter Holdings, quiet and clean, tied to nothing but my business filings and a separate P.O. box I'd set up a year prior. The house wasn't even my favorite investment, it was just the first one she noticed, so when she tried to report me to the board for illegal subletting, I calmly forwarded them the deed with the correct owner info, the rental permits, the inspection approvals, and the signed contracts for the 2 tenants. Moving in that weekend, the chair of the HOA called me personally and said, "I think someone's trying to sabotage you, but you're solid." I smiled and said, "Thank you for confirming, Lexi." Of course, doubled down. She showed up at the property on Saturday. I saw it through the Nest Cam, her white SUV. Her hair pulled back into that fake casual bun she only wore when trying to look composed under pressure. She knocked on the door, talked to the tenants like she was the victim of a huge mistake, even tried to guilt trip one of them by saying, "This was supposed to be my house," but they had been briefed, and one of them, bless her, replied, "Well, maybe you should have bought it first." Lexi stormed off after that, and I expected some cold silence. Maybe another passive-aggressive holiday card, but instead I got something worse: dinner with my parents. They called me the next week, said they wanted to clear the air, that they were so proud of how responsible I'd become. Which in my family was code for, "We're uncomfortable with your new power." I showed up anyway, not for them, but because I needed to hear it for myself, to see if anything had really changed. Dinner was at their house, same old candles, same roast chicken, same smug silence from Mom every time I opened my mouth. Halfway through, Dad finally brought it up. "Lexi's been really upset," he said, cutting into his chicken like it hadn't bled all over Thanksgiving. "She feels like you blindsided her." "I didn't," I said simply. "I just stopped stepping aside." Mom folded her napkin with a sigh. "You two used to be so close." "No," I said, looking her dead in the eye, "you just pretended we were so you wouldn't have to deal with the truth." The air went still, even the silverware paused. "Which is what?" she asked tightly. I didn't flinch. "That you taught her she was the sun and the rest of us were lucky just to orbit." They didn't argue, not really, just changed the subject, and that was all the confirmation I needed. They weren't proud of me. They were afraid of what I'd become, a version of myself they couldn't guilt or mold or diminish. So I finished my wine, excused myself early, and never looked back. A week passed without another word from Lexi, no texts, no surprise pop-ins. Not even a fake friendly comment on my social media like she usually did when she wanted to remind me she was watching, but that silence was just another tactic, and sure enough, I got a call from my accountant on Monday. "Zoe, did you authorize a background inquiry from a private firm?" I hadn't, of course, but Lexi had, or at least tried to, using my maiden name, an old address, and a fake pretext that she was doing family estate planning, amateur-level digging. Honestly, but it told me something important. She wasn't trying to win anymore, she was trying to destroy. She wasn't just bitter about the house, she was unraveling because the one person she'd always stepped on to climb had suddenly climbed higher. I didn't respond, didn't take the bait. Just tightened up every digital wall I had, new passwords, new cloud security, full freeze on my credit. Even changed the locks at my personal place just in case, because with Lexi, you never really knew how far she'd go when she felt small. The next weekend, I ran into her by accident at the grocery store, the same store we both used to go to with Mom when we were kids, holding hands over the shopping cart handle and pretending not to argue over cereal. She looked flawless, of course, makeup tight, outfit curated. But her eyes were tired and her smile brittle. "Funny seeing you here," she said, holding a basket with just lemon water, a baguette, and one perfectly placed orchid. I nodded, reached for a box of pasta and said nothing. "Look," she said after a pause, "I didn't mean for things to get so tense. You tried to have me disqualified from my own deed." I said without even turning. "That's not tense, that's sabotage. You humiliated me," she whispered, her voice tight. "You used that house to make a point." I turned to face her, and for once, I wasn't shaking, I wasn't second-guessing, I wasn't 15 years old and begging her to stop turning people against me. "No," I said, calm and even, "I made a point because for once, you weren't allowed to erase me from the narrative." She looked at me like she didn't understand the words, like the idea that I even had a narrative at all was offensive. "You know Mom and Dad were devastated," she added, like that was supposed to make me bend. "Good," I replied, "maybe they'll finally realize I'm not the backup plan." Lexi didn't follow me out of the aisle, didn't call after me, and for once didn't try to spin the moment into something sympathetic for onlookers. She just stood there, frozen, still holding her useless little basket like it was going to save her, and I walked away lighter, not because I'd won, but because I'd finally stopped letting her define what winning looked like. The next few weeks were quiet, suspiciously so. No texts, no emails, not even a petty post online, which from Lexi was like watching a volcano go silent mid-eruption. And then one morning, I got a voicemail from Mom, voice brittle and formal. "We need to talk about Lexi." I didn't want to return the call, but something in her tone, the kind of cold she reserved for funerals and cancelled checks, made me curious, so I drove over that evening, same beige house, same porch light that had flickered since I was 16 and no one ever bothered to fix. Mom opened the door like she hadn't aged a day and somehow aged a decade all at once. She's selling everything, she said before I even got inside. Lexi, I asked, confused. Her apartment, her car, she says she needs to liquidate. Why? I asked. She didn't say, Mom whispered, eyes darting toward the kitchen like Lexi might overhear through sheer memory, just that it was time to start over. And this involves me how? I asked flatly, because she told us. It was your fault, Mom said, looking like she wanted me to say it wasn't, that you ruined her chances, her credit, her future. I didn't touch her credit. I snapped. She did that all on her own. Mom didn't argue, just stared at me like she didn't recognize who I'd become. She wants to meet, she finally said. She says she wants peace. I nearly laughed. Lexi doesn't do peace, she does image repair, but I agreed anyway, not because I believed her, but because I needed to see what version of herself she'd show up as this time. We met at a neutral cafe, small and quiet, halfway between our childhood neighborhood and the new development I was about to purchase a second unit in. She looked normal, not ruined, not radiant, just human, which was maybe the strangest look she'd ever worn in my presence. I'm leaving, she said without preamble, moving to Florida. Okay, I said. Why, tell me? Because, she said slowly, I realized the person I've been fighting with all these years wasn't you. I blinked, caught off guard. Then who? She looked down at her hands, fingers fidgeting with the edge of her cup. Them. Mom and Dad. The image. The performance. I didn't reply right away, because part of me still expected a trap, a jab, a cruel little twist at the end, but it didn't come. I'm tired, she said. I spent so long trying to be the favorite that I never noticed how miserable it made me. I sipped my coffee, still unsure if this was a performance or a collapse. I'm not asking you to forgive me, she added, just, maybe let this end here. I stared at her for a long moment, letting the silence stretch between us like a wire pulled tight. She looked so different sitting there without the armor of praise or the smugness of competition. Just Lexi, raw and unfinished, maybe even honest for once, and still, I didn't reach across the table. I didn't offer absolution or tell her it was okay, because it wasn't. Not really. I'm not angry anymore, I said eventually. But I'm also not interested in rewriting what happened. She nodded slowly, as if she expected that. Then I guess this is goodbye. Maybe, I replied, or maybe it's just finally distance. She didn't cry, didn't beg, didn't throw one last barb like I half expected. She just stood, whispered good luck, and left, and I didn't follow. I sat there with my coffee cooling and the weight lifting from my chest in a way I hadn't felt since I was a teenager, standing behind her in every family photo. I didn't text anyone, didn't post some vague quote about closure. I just walked to my car, slid into the driver's seat, and opened the email from my agent, confirming the second property had officially closed, not the house Lexi tried to buy, but the one next door, the one I'd quietly had my eye on since her offer fell apart. I'd purchased it through a different LLC, under a different trust. No trace, no flags, no attention, just mine. I stared at the screen, then glanced at the last message Lexi had sent weeks ago. Hope it was worth it, and I almost laughed, because it was. It really, really was, not because I got the house, or because I got to prove them all wrong, but because I finally stopped needing them to see me to know I was real. I didn't steal Lexi's life, I just stopped handing her the pen to write mine. And as I looked out at the evening light spilling across the quiet street where I now owned more than just property, I own peace, I whispered, more to myself than anyone else. The house was never the prize. I was, and this time, no one interrupted. Lexi walked away that day, but Zoe didn't just win the fight. She rewrote the rules. No shouting. No dragging anyone down. Just quiet strategy, unshakable resolve. And the sweetest ending money can't buy. This story was written by the creator of this channel. Every twist, every reveal, imagined and crafted just for you. If you're new here, welcome to the Sweetest Revenge, where justice isn't loud, but unforgettable. Subscribe for more original stories that feel way too real, because sometimes, the best revenge is simply taking your power back.